Alright guys, we're going to take a little bit of a break from the combatives talk right now, and I'm going to go off on a little rabbit trail. You'll have to forgive me, tune out, you guys put your fingers in your ears, hum the tunes of Amazing Grace, whatever you need to do if this is not your thing, but I'm going to go off on a little bit of a rant here for a minute. The President made a statement the other day that as a result of the men and women in uniform and naturally his awesome leadership, that we have not had a terrorist attack occur on our soil in the last 8 years. This has to do with, there's an element of truth to that and there's an element of falsehood to that. And how you define terms is the key component to determining the truth and the falsehood here. So all terrorist activities are by definition, regardless of the state that you're in, regardless of the nation you're in rather, they're illegal acts. But the underlying motivation behind it is what determines whether or not it is terrorism or it's just an illegal act. So for instance, terrorism, if the chief motivation of the individual is to instill terror to accomplish a political agenda, then we define it as terrorism. If it's just an attack for the sake of just killing and there's no ideological basis behind it, then we would just classify that as an illegal act, in which case other units get involved in that. So in the intelligence community, you'll see this term a lot, and it's MICE. And basically what it stands for is money, ideology, coercion, and ego. And these are the chief motivating factors for why things occur. So just for instance, a scientist from Los Alamos puts together some documents and turns around and he sells them to China. We would say that the chief motivating factor behind that is money. He is driven monetarily to commit an act of treason. By the same token, we take the Fort Hood shootings, and this individual goes out and begins shooting up servicemen at Fort Hood. This is not generated by money. This is not generated by coercion. He was not coerced into committing that act. He was not motivated by ego in the sense that he was a disgruntled officer who was just trying to get back at command and then goes out and decides to show them. This is something that was ideologically driven. So therefore it has an ideological basis. We classify that as terrorism. And terrorism is not necessarily just Islamically motivated. Terrorism could also be classified as, you go back to the Cold War and a lot of the fascist elements that were out there and these pro-communist groups that were committing acts of terrorism and so on and so forth. The ideology that was driving them was fascism or communism or whatever it was that was driving them. Their chief motivating factor was an ideology which was causing them to commit the act, and the act was designed to create terror, therefore terrorism. So definition is everything. So when the President says that we have not had an illegal act or have not had an act of terrorism in the last 8 years, this basically comes down to how he's defining the acts that were committed. So in the sense that we had the Orlando attacks where the gay nightclub was shot up, once again done by a Muslim for Muslim reasons, ideological reasons, therefore classified as terrorism. However, this administration refuses to call it such, therefore it gets classified under illegal activity. You had the Boston bombings, once again, 2 Muslim attackers who go out and commit these atrocities motivated by their ideology, defined as terrorism. However, this administration doesn't see it as such. They classify it as just an illegal activity. This is how they're getting around. They're using a little bit of wordplay to get around some of the terms. All right? So We saw this in World War II also. Hitler actually legalized, I don't know how many people actually realize this, but he actually legalized the euthanizing of the Jews. And the way that he did this was through definitions, by defining terms. So you had human and non-human. And in his mind, you had the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, which were the highest level of evolution. And then you had the Jews, which were basically subhuman, just above primates. So in his mind, and based on their legal definitions, how they did this, they were not actually killing anyone. They were taking a subhuman species and euthanizing them to prevent the propagation of that species. Now, obviously, I don't support this. However, you have to understand that there's a pattern that is going on here where they define a term, then they broaden the term, then they take the group in. So, good versus bad. We see this even in the United States. Say, go back to gun control, just as a matter of instance. So, gun control. We all agree we don't want individuals with mental disabilities, guys who are jacked up on Zoloft, people with severe psychological problems. I think we all agree that these individuals don't need to have access to firearms. However, you have to understand that what is going on is they say these people are bad, these people are good. And what they gradually end up doing is they isolate that particular group, these are the bad group, and then they segregate them. They remove them, remove their rights, whatever the situation calls for. Gradually what happens is they reform and they attack. Again, and they broaden that definition. So each time what they're doing is they're going in and they're broadening that definition to segregate a particular portion of the populace. So, truth versus falsehood. How do we define truth versus falsehood? A particular instance that we had during the elections was Hillary came out and said that all 17 agencies, intelligence agencies, had all agreed that the Russians were involved in hacking. Well, was this true? Yes and no, sort of. What happened is you had the DNI, who is the Director of National Intelligence. He is in charge of what we know as the ODNI, which is the Office of Director of National Intelligence. The ODNI then has all of these sub-branches, so you have the CIA, you have the DIA, you have the NSA, you have all of these different agencies, 16 plus 17, the ODNI. All 17 agencies are headed up by the Director of National Intelligence. And essentially what happened is the Director of National Intelligence with the Department of Homeland Security issued a memo that said that the Russians were involved in hacking the elections. Now, each one of these agencies did not do an investigation to find out whether or not this was true. What happened is their chief representative, represented by the DNI, made the statement, and by virtue of the fact that he made the statement, and by virtue of the fact that he speaks on behalf of all 17 agencies, thus she makes the statement, all 17 agencies found that the Russians were involved in hacking the election. So is this true? Is it not true? Well, it depends on how you define it, because the DNI represents these individuals and he did issue a memo. However, each one of these agencies did not conduct an investigation into hacking of the elections, so therefore her statement is both true and false. And you have to understand that that's essentially where this woman lies, is right in that realm of gray area where she's knowingly deceiving, but yet not outwardly lying in many cases. So the DNI, just point of interest, is appointed by the president, which is a political office, and this appointee, which gets confirmed by the Senate, therefore becomes a political figure. We've already had issues with intelligence professionals, intelligence analysts rather, that have actually left the intelligence community as a result of the fact that they've been asked to compromise their integrity and report on certain things and not report on certain things that did not agree with this particular administration. So that being the case, the head intelligence official, the chief of all the intelligence agencies, the chief representative of, when he makes a statement, not in conjunction with these, but on behalf, she ends up making or restating the statement, and basically it ends up being looked at as truth. So understand that there's how things are defined and the patterns that exist are consistent in all of these areas. When you start getting into small unit tactics, when you start getting into large forces, there are patterns as well, and these patterns will start to emerge even on down to the individual level. So something to think about, and also something to kind of question: how do you define truth? Is it based on you, your opinion? You know, Obama did that. So if it's not based on some set standard, one of the reasons why our founders went with Judeo-Christian values was because it was a codified set standard of right and wrong that had pre-existed our arrival here in the U.S. By defining a set standard, you now have a foundation that cannot be deviated from. When you allow people to go in and manipulate the definitions, you allow an area for people to redefine things. You redefine Jews as being subhuman. You redefine parts of the population as being potentially bad. So understand that it starts with a term, then going in and gradually broadening that term. The people who are not bucking the system, you don't care about, because they're not bucking the system. The people who do buck the system, those people get classified into another area by gradually broadening those terms. So something to think about.